My name is Ruth Bernhardt, and I live in Brentwood at 8 Winthrop Road with my husband, George.
Okay.
We've lived here in Brentwood. It will be 50 years in October in our married life. But I lived in Brentwood for 78 years, having moved here when I was just going to be 3 years old in 1921.
Ruth, that's a remarkable statement. You have seen Brentwood go through many, many changes in those years.
That's right.
What are some of your earliest memories of Brentwood?
Well, I think I remember more than I do because I heard a lot of it
Sure.
from brothers and sisters and parents. I'm one of 8 children. We all went through the entire Brentwood school district except the 3 older ones who were already started school when we moved to Brentwood. Of course, and as I say, I hear from them the things that went on when we first moved here. I can remember my mother telling me that for several months I cried. I wanted to go home. I didn't like it. But we got through that part of it. And after myself, I was a middle child, more or less. I had 3 brothers and a sister.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my sister Eleanor also worked in Brentwood School District. And in the same building that I worked, I started there in 54 and she started there in 64. However, she's 11 years younger than I.
Oh.
So.
Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your family, about your siblings? And
Okay.
Okay.
My siblings or my
Yeah,
current
you
family?
can start with your siblings. You said you came from a family of 8.
I came from a family of 8. I was born in South Ozone Park.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved here, I had my oldest brother, a sister, a brother, and then myself. And being born in Brentwood was my brother Carl, who was a priest, my brother Robert, my sister Eleanor, who worked for the district, and my brother Walter, whom unfortunately we lost at an early age, considering all of us. He was only 15.
Mm.
Of course, I remember first starting school. We didn't have kindergarten. We lived 1.25 miles from school, and we walked.
Now, would that have been at, what building would that have been in?
It was the original building over here that they tore down now. That's made it into there is none of the original building left.
When you say they tore it down, this little hexagonal building?
No.
That goes back to the 19th century.
Right.
I was thinking more like the library, the part
that was the library. Was it a
4-room schoolhouse?
It was a 2-room schoolhouse. There were 4 classes in each room. We called it the big room and the little room. And each teacher had 4 classes to teach.
Now, just for the audience that's listening, this is presently the brick structure that is attached to the Brentwood Public Library.
That's a misnomer because that is not the building that I went to school in. They tore that piece down.
Oh, is that right?
The front building that's still attached, and they call the old Brentwood School, was the new addition the year that I graduated from school in September.
Now I learned something.
They moved into that. There's none of the old building there.
I see.
I wish I had pictures to show you of that building with big tall steps that went up into the building. But it was only 2 rooms, 2 big rooms. And there was the 1st through the 4th grade in one side and the 5th through the 8th grade in the other side.
I guess it was a frame building then. It was.
No,
was it brick?
Brick building.
It was brick. Okay.
I think the cornerstone said 1901.
Uh-huh. Can you describe the inside of that for us?
Yeah, big room, big windows, oiled floors, wood floors, desks that they didn't lift up. They were permanently attached to the floor, and you put your books and stuff in.
In rows, I suspect. In inkwell with a rows. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And
each class that was going to be taught by the teacher that was hired for that class, that 4 grades, would in turn go up, and they had the long benches in the front of the room, and you'd sit in there and you were taught your reading, and then next group would go up and they would learn their reading. Of course, some of this rubbed off on everybody, you know.
Was this multiple grades then?
This first through the fourth grade.
Uh-huh.
And then when you started in the fifth grade, you went into the other room.
Into the other room.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay.
And the year, well, through my all through the eighth grade, they took a big canvas curtain and separated this 5, 6, 7, and 8, so that there were 2 grades. And I don't know, I was saying to my husband this morning, I can't remember. I only remember 2 teachers all the while I went to school there. But who took care of the ones on the other side of the curtain? I don't remember that.
Who were the teachers that you remember?
My first grade teacher was a Miss Floyd. And then she got married and moved away. She was a Mrs. Mitchell, but she came back and worked in the Brentwood School District. Later on, when my son went to school here, she was the 3rd grade teacher. And we had a Mrs. Lee, Miss Hollow. Mr. Burdick was the teaching principal when I graduated, and he had 2 children in school.
Now you say Mr. Burdick was the teaching principal. Some folks don't realize that the title principal came from the job description of principal teacher, that the principals also taught.
Well, that's what it was, yeah.
Okay. What year was it now that you started school in that building?
It must have been in 1925. I was 5 years old.
Okay. So Ruth, you predate, your experience predates the Great Depression, and you were in school in Brentwood even before the Depression.
Yes. Uh-huh. The Depression wasn't until, what, 28?
So 29 with 29, the crash and then following that. So you were well into public education here.
Yeah. By then I was 10 years old.
And you walked to school?
Walked to school. There wasn't any high school in Brentwood when we went to school, when I was going to school.
I believe it was in Bayshore, wasn't it?
No. Bayshore wouldn't take us because there wasn't any means of transportation across the island. So there was at this time, my father was well into working with this school district. And there used to be, the Central Islip High School was designated for Brentwood. But we weren't too keen about that. And they acquired Farmingdale. So I used to go on the train, all of us that graduated at that time. In fact, even my younger sister went to Farmingdale for a while until Brentwood, Bayshore, then finally built the newer building, and they were able to take on more students. So she graduated from Bayshore, but I went to Farmingdale.
So your high school diploma came from Farmingdale?
Right.
My goodness. Okay.
But even when going to high school, we still walked to the train. When we got to Farmingdale, we were at least a mile away, maybe a little less. Walked from the train to school. We had a permanent late pass because you couldn't get from the train to the school by 9:05. Mm-hmm. So it was just a few minutes that we would miss there.
And you survived that all right. There are a lot of people who get in a lot of trouble for being 30 seconds late today.
Right. And
no excuse today, though.
No. But we didn't have any snow days.
That's right, yes.
Snowed,
what did you do during the snow?
Went to walked. Mm-hmm. Walked to school.
And I'll bet there were very few roads that were plowed.
There weren't any really roads. Everything was dirt roads. We lived on a dirt road. Neighbors would go up through the side of the road and chop down the brush so that you could get out to a main road, if you would call it that. Washington Avenue was just a dirt road.
It was a dirt road.
There wasn't any telephone or electric where we moved in Brentwood. Mm-hmm. In fact, I only live about 5 blocks from the home I was raised in here.
My goodness. Well, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to say in a world that has been changing constantly around you.
Yes.
That's what I call stability.
It didn't last like that, though, for my own. We only have one son. And he wound up in California. And
yes.
So we've been separated, that way. But they went to seek their...
Let me take you back to some of the teachers that if you had those teachers that you remembered and have named, you Do you remember any of your teachers from Farmingdale?
I remember names.
You
You know,
do?
it's very good. Miss Norton was the science teacher, and Mrs. Moyer was my homeroom teacher. But you know, going from this type of situation here into we were just at a loss to have to make out your own schedule. What was a schedule? I didn't know what a schedule was.
Oh.
And then, of course, having to catch the train and be there, and there wasn't an early train coming home, so it was a long day as far as.
Did you ever get in trouble in school, Ruth?
Not really. No, I was too.
You don't strike me as a troublemaker for some reason.
No, no, I didn't.
No memory of any.
Yeah.
Of
And
any
anybody
problem.
wouldn't have gotten away with it. The teacher was right.
Did you have any nicknames growing up?
Ruthie, of course.
Yes.
My our oldest brother was William. He was Willie. There was only 2 or 3 that didn't have a name that the IE would go on it.
I see. Yes.
So.
Yes. I keep mentioning maiden name. It keeps slipping in. I guess I want to ask you what your maiden name was.
My maiden name was Baker.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Ruth Baker Bernhardt.
Okay. Now you mentioned where you're still living in Brentwood.
Still living in Brentwood.
In the home that you've lived since '54, I think you said.
No, I moved to Brentwood in the house that I live right now in 1949 in October. So it'll be 50 years in October that we're there.
Okay. And who is at home with you at the present time?
Just my husband and myself.
Okay. And you mentioned having been married for 50 years.
We'll be married 59 years next month.
My goodness, that's wonderful. Tell us about your husband. What's his name? And tell us all.
Oh, his name is George Frederick Bernhardt. He's a wonderful man.
How did you guys meet? And when did you
Actually,
meet?
we met way back in 1936. And my oldest brother was married to his oldest sister. That's how we became to get to one another. We weren't school chums or anything. He was born and brought up in Bayshore, went all through Bayshore High School.
What attracted you to this young man?
He was just a great guy, really.
Did you meet at a function or just
no,
an
actually,
personal introduction?
The way we met was my oldest brother, and his sister, my sister-in-law, had their second child, and George's mother insisted that he come and get me and bring me up to, well, I'm getting ahead of that story. I used to live out. That's how I worked, working as a mother's helper in Bayshore. And of course, he had a car and could drive, and he came to get me, to bring me home. And my oldest brother and sister-in-law, in fact, she still lives right next door to where we grew up, because that's where he built his home. She is still alive, and she was 89 years old in December. Very active person. Also worked for the Brentwood School District. Also was a secretary for the school board when my father was president of the school board. She was active with the superintendent of schools in Bayshore. After she graduated from high school, she went to work for him. And I got lost there, though.
Well, you were talking about your sister, but the question was how you met.
Yeah, that's really, really
Okay.
how we met. You might say we were kind of thrown together in that respect.
Yes, yeah.
But it was a lasting thing.
I should say so. Now, what I had asked you also to tell me a little bit about your husband and what kind of a guy he is, what he has done, what kind of work that he's done. What does he enjoy doing?
He enjoys fishing tremendously. So I do too, though.
Do you?
Yeah. And we like boating and fishing, gardening, and.
Is this freshwater or saltwater or both?
He doesn't do freshwater. He likes saltwater. In fact, when he can't go and do the fishing, he satisfies himself with the videotapes put on the radio.
Yes.
Still at this age. Unfortunately, he isn't too well a man. He has emphysema, and he has to be careful.
Yes. Yeah.
But we manage about once a year to get out to California to see our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, tell me about the children now.
Well, my son and daughter-in-law had 2 girls. Jill and Kim. Jill is married and has 2 youngsters, so we're great-grandparents. Jill is the older one of the 2, and she was a very bright gal. She works for Intel in California, and she's coming to see us on the 12th of April, so we're looking forward to that. 2 lovely girls. Lovely family, is just that they're too far away.
Yes. Yeah.
But, and my son is retired on a disability, belonged to the Fremont, California Fire Department, and he was injured at work, so he had to retire at a rather early age. He's going to be 57 in November.
Oh, my.
He has a very bad back problem. But other than that, we've all been blessed and, you know, lucky to have one another, even though we're far apart. Why?
I'd like to ask you about your mom and dad. You mentioned that your father had been active too. Tell me about your mother and your dad.
Well, my mother was really a homebody with 8 children to take care of. I guess you can well imagine that.
Was she born in this country?
No, my mother was born in Germany. She came here when she was 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But my father was born right here in Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
And they married, I guess it was in 1909 or 1910.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived, of course, in that area, Brooklyn, South Ozone Park,
Mm-hmm.
and had 4 of us when they moved out here to Brentwood. And I guess it was quite a hardship for my mother moving from where at that time gas lights and gas stoves were, you know, the thing.
Civilization, you might say.
Right.
Yes.
And then to move here with nothing. We had no electricity and no telephone. But my father was very into, he was an electrician actually. And it wasn't long before he acquired a generator, and we had 32 volt, you know, electric. And before long, we used to have to walk to a neighbor at least half mile from home to get to use a telephone if it was necessary. And it was necessary because my mother had, let's see, 4 other children born at home after we moved out here.
Yes.
But,
and that's the way it was in those days,
right.
Even before hospitals became involved.
Right.
Now, what did folks do for water? Everyone had their own wells?
No, we didn't. When we first moved to Brentwood, and I only vaguely remember this also because I was that young, we had a deep cistern, and that the town used to have to deliver you water in a big wooden truck, or horse and wagon, would fill that up. But as I say, my father was very ingenious in a lot of that stuff. He got his 32 volt generator. He dug a deep well, and he had a pump that pumped the water, and he built a tower and pumped the water up there. So we had running water. It would, run into the
So you had your own water tower on your own property?
Right.
That's what you're right. He was ingenious. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That was not a solution that most folks were able to arrive at.
Yeah, he was like that.
What kinds of family traits, do you see in the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren, or even in your own children that you know are family traits, or something that's come to you through your own family heritage? Is there anything that you see that's been passed along? You mentioned somebody was with Intel. Was that the daughter-in-law?
No, that's my oldest granddaughter.
Your oldest granddaughter. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Yes.
No, my daughter-in-law worked here. She lived in Bayshore also. When she and my son got married, they both lived here. She had a half-brother that lived in California that she only knew through letter writing, and her mother, kept in contact with him. And she always longed to see him, I guess. And they decided to take this trip. And they liked it when they got there and found work. And she worked here for the water company in Bayshore.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned Mom was busy with 8 children.
Right.
What did your mother like to do? Besides, she probably didn't have too much spare time, but if she had spare time, what do you think she would have enjoyed?
Well, my mother, and it might have been that she liked to do it. It was more or less of a necessity too, but we always had a garden, and she took care of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
you say it was always or almost a necessity. And what I immediately think of is we're talking here about Depression years too. So
Yes.
that the garden was not just flowers, it was a vegetable garden.
Mostly vegetables until, I liked to do the flower thing when I got old enough to take over doing something like that. She liked flowers too, but of course they had the garden and she would have to, in those days you didn't have a freezer, they put things up, hot water bathing in jars and stuff like that.
Canned
things
to preserve
to carry us through, the winter months.
Really, yes. Do you have specific memories, Ruth, of the Depression and how it impacted on your family? We're talking about from 1929 through the 30s until things began to improve.
Well, yes and no. A lot of that was shielded from us. I mean, if there was a problem, we never went hungry. My father was always able to find something to do. He was a superintendent of the packet plant in Long Island City when we first moved to Brentwood. So he used to have to commute by train to work. And then he owned his own business with a partner in Bayshore.
And what kind of business was that?
Electrical and motor, mechanic. Yeah. And then my oldest brother, when he was old enough and out of school, he went to work for them.
Went into the family business.
Right. That part of the Depression, I remember in 1932, he lost his business because of, we're not able to.
Yes.
So then he had to go look for individual work again.
Go ahead, say what you're going to say.
I was going to say, I tell the kids this so many times. In fact, we just talked about it this morning. I walk with my sister and a neighbor. My sister, Eleanor, that I mentioned to you, she just lives about 5 blocks away from me. And we were talking this morning, this lady that we walk with comes from Hungary. And she was a grown woman, and I think she had a youngster when she moved here, right after the World War II. And we were talking about ham and how delicious it is. And she was saying there was no ham like the one her father used to have because he was a farmer in Hungary, and they raised their own animals and did their own thing. And George's own dad did that. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mark Country Day School in Bayshore. Well, that was where his father had his farm. He didn't own the farm. He rented there, I think. And that's where he raised these delicious pigs that had the best hams you could want, right? So it all leads back to, and George's father could not drive, and yet he moved so many times. I don't know how he managed to do that.
I started to ask you about your mother, and I was curious as to how your father became involved with the district. This was after he lost his business, I guess.
No.
Tell me about that.
Right, shortly. I guess it was shortly after we moved to Brentwood. The Brentwood Firehouse was just that building on First Avenue there, big wooden building, and they had a tank that was horse-drawn, or later on when you had a car, you could pull it with the car. That's what they fought fires with. And he became involved there with the fire department.
Oh, I see. So he joined the fire department.
No, he didn't join. They didn't, no. It was just a volunteer. Everybody ran when there was a fire.
Without even a membership, just whoever could come. Right. Okay.
But later on in life, my father became a fire warden for this district here. And he had his own fire truck, and he engaged men to help fight. Because Brentwood was all woods. In fact, we had a bad fire that came through the area where our homestead was. And we had chickens out in a fence behind the garage. And the fires came so close, it singed the hair on the feathers on the chickens.
My goodness.
So, of course, we were all frightened of forest fires. Anytime you saw smoke someplace, you packed your little box together and headed away from the...
Someone once told me, Ruth, that Brentwood once had a lot of chicken farms up off Washington Avenue. Is that true?
Not off Washington Avenue. They were off... well, I shouldn't say that. On the Motor Parkway, there were chicken farms. And then East Brentwood, which we call Cabinet Frederick, because he developed that area. There were a lot of chicken farms in there.
Because some of the vets who looked who dreamed about starting their own business when they came out of the war after World War II, came out to Brentwood, settled to try their hand at raising chickens and so on.
Yeah.
Now that, of course, is all gone now.
No,
all of
that's
that.
the other thing, mentioning chickens. When my husband first started to work for the post office in Bayshore, first he worked as a substitute, of course, and then he worked his way in. He had what they call the rural route. He had to use his own automobile. And he delivered chickens in the boxes. I don't know if you ever knew how they were delivered through the mail. My mother used to buy them that way. Only thing, our mail wasn't delivered. We used to have to go to the post office and get it. But
You mean if you wanted a fresh chicken, it was delivered?
No. If you wanted baby chicks to
A
raise
baby chick to raise them on
right.
your own. That's how it was.
That's how the chicken farmers up there did that too. And he used to deliver those little peeping chickens in the boxes to the chicken farmers.
My goodness.
Yeah.
How did he get involved with the school district?
Who?
You mentioned your husband was involved. He was in the fire department.
No. That's my father.
Oh, your father.
My father was in the fire.
I'm confused. Okay, it was your father was.
That's when we first moved to Brentwood.
How did he get involved with the school district?
He was very civic minded, and he had all of his children going there, and he was very disappointed, and none of us took after him as far as being that civic minded, because we could see how it is when you want to stand up for your rights.
So he became involved by what? Running for a position?
Running for a position.
And that was for what? School board?
The school board. He was the president of the school board.
Oh, he was the president of the school board in Brentwood. Okay. Now,
Before
so that
Mr.
means,
Sondling.
I was going to say, that means you must have met Mr. Sondling, Ed Sondling, and known a lot of the other significant adults that were responsible.
Well, Mr. Sondling was still with the school district when I started to work for the Brentwood School District. As I say, he was president for 20 years.
Mm.
But that was after my father's time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you know anything about the decisions that your father was asked to make while he was on the board, some of the changes that happened? I suspect the changes didn't happen as quickly in those days as they did in years that you were growing up and going to school in the system. Changes were coming fast and furious in Brentwood.
Yes, terribly. In fact, the school board, I don't know whether it was just the president or if the school board met, they hired the teachers. There were only 2 teachers, but I mean, they interviewed and hired the teachers for the positions in the school. It's only 2, of course, as I said, 1 for the 1st through the 4th and 1 for the 5th through the 8th.
Gee, there are so many things that some of the memories that you have when. Well, tell me how you came to work for the school district. How did that?
Well, in 1954. They began to build the district was so overcrowded. Well, it was overcrowded before that because they used the parish house of the Episcopal Church for some grades. And I guess they went on split session in some grades. And this was through the times that my own youngster was going to school. But in 1954, they decided they'd build 2 new schools, one over in the southwest district of the school, and one over in the northeast. And the northeast school happened to be within, at the time, because it wasn't so built up, I could see the building going on from the home in which I live now. And of course, my son had already gotten to be of an age where, you didn't have to be with him all the time. And he was going into the 7th grade. He was very disappointed that there was a school so close to him, only went through the 6th grade. And that was the year he had to start going down to the village. And I decided I would contact Mr. Stewart because we knew him. I mean, the rest of my siblings, after I had him as a principal. And
This is Lee Stewart.
This is Lee Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
And I called and asked, and he called me down for an interview, and he hired me right away. I guess he figured I would be able to do the job. Mm-hmm. Very unfortunately, Ralph Sakin was hired as the principal of that building, and his mother passed away on the opening of school. And being Hebrew, they had to sit Shiva.
Shiva, yes.
And he was taken away from school. And here I am, a novice, opening the school. With,
Oh my goodness,
We
thrown
had-
to you.
we got through it somehow. But people don't believe this, and I can understand why. The buildings weren't finished. The men were working inside with scaffoldings. We used to take the children into the rooms, call the roll, put them on the bus, and send them back home for a couple of weeks. And as secretary in the building, there was no facilities, no telephone. I used to have to go out in the workman's shanty to use the phone if it was necessary to call down to the village school. But I mean, it was people that's here now could never believe that. The young people, I think, when they'll sit and listen, but I don't think that really sinks
In other words, you think you have problems now. You should have seen what it was like then. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So this was when Brentwood was booming in
Right.
terms of the
1950.
post-war development
Right.
schools. These
Right.
were the first two, after Village, these were the first two elementary schools
That's right.
that were
The
being
village
built.
school was built. Well, my youngster went to village school,
Mhm.
the one on 3rd Avenue.
Mhm.
Well, they were both on 3rd Avenue, but this was, we called it the big school.
Yes.
And there wasn't any high school in Brentwood, even at that time, when they were taking on a grade a year until he was his senior year. Then he had his graduation from the Sonderling building. But other than that, he was in the village
Was it
school.
Sondling or was it Ross?
I'm sorry.
The Ross building, yes.
Ross building, the first
Yeah,
building that
right.
they built.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the Ross building, which is still part of the high school, must have been built in the mid-50s too, or early 50s at least.
Oh,
completed.
yes. Well, they were building it, you
Uh-huh.
know, but now my son graduated in 1961, and they had only just, that next September, I think the youngsters would start going to the high school, to the regular high school. Up until then, they were going in the village school, what is now the administration building.
Mm. Mm. Well, you have seen it all. You have literally seen all of the changes that came through. You were interviewed for the job. You find yourself in a baptism of fire when the principal is suddenly not there and you have to open the building. Who are some of the people you worked with?
Oh, lovely people, really. Actually, there are only 14 teachers in that building. We opened the building, we opened school, or started school there in September 1954. And in February 1955, we went on split session because we were overcrowded. So we had this 2, 4, and 6 grades were on split session, so they had to hire that many more teachers. But I worked with Marie Grasser was her name. She married, and she was Marie Girolamo. And she graduated from Brentwood, went to Farmingdale and Bayshore like my sister. She went to school. They went to school together. They were the same age. And then Lee Stewart hired her as a first grade teacher in Northeast School because we were overcrowded and they had
Well, they must have needed people like
31 youngsters in a classroom.
crazy.
And then she stayed with Brentwood until she retired, which was only a few years ago. She and my sister are both 11 years younger than I. So,
Ruth, where did you get your skills? Where did you learn to do the clerical and secretarial
well, I
work?
took type. I wanted to be a business, work in business.
Mhm.
So I took typing and shorthand and stuff in high school. But unfortunately, there was no jobs to be had. I started off, my first experience with being able to use those skills was during the Depression time. There was, they call it the NYA, National Youth Administration. And I was hired for a position there where I worked in the old ISOP Town Hall. But they would only hire you like for every other week, like for $26 a week or whatever.
To
we
give
got.
other people a chance too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
But it gave me experience.
Was that your first? Well, that wasn't your first working job.
It wasn't
or
my
your
first working job because before that I would work as
Yeah.
a mother's helper or,
Yes.
and live in the home with the the family.
Speaking of working and being paid, do you remember what you made your first year in Brentwood as a clerical?
Yes, I made $1,800 a year. I worked. I was hired on a 10-month basis, but because they needed somebody through the summer, I was paid per diem then through the summer, breaking down that $1,800, which is like, if you tell the children today that you made $1,800.
Yeah, and as I usually say, after hearing these phenomenal numbers, that was before you were taxed on it. And then you were taxed on top of that, so that you didn't actually take home $1,800 a year.
But by the same token, Ralph Sakin, I don't know if you know that name or if
I do know the name. I didn't know him, but I do know the name.
He was hired as a principal for $5,000 a year. So,
yes.
I mean, that was good money compared to
what others were paying. What influenced, why did you decide to take those courses in high school to prepare for a business career? And then the Depression hits right after that. What made you go in that direction for business? Do you recall why or who? Or
well, I took a business course because I thought I loved to type.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I didn't graduate from high school. I have a high school diploma. But it was Depression times, and
like so many others,
they needed my help at home and whatever I could do.
Okay, so you were forced to leave school during the Depression to help out at home, like so many other people were. And you never had an opportunity then with getting married and raising your own children to go back and to finish. And there was no need anyway because you had the job now and you had the experience, and one thing led to the other.
I wound up working for, it was Swiderski Aircraft in Farmingdale. There, of course, too, my dad was the place that he worked. He was a safety engineer there. And then it turned into Republic just before the war started. So I got a lot of experience there. I worked for the Division of Old Age Assistance in Bayshore for several years before I transferred there. It was better money. That was for the state, and this was... And in those days, and only a part-time worker, you didn't have any benefits, so I wasn't losing anything as far as benefits were concerned.
Right. Do you have a specific memories of either the beginning of the war or World War II or the end of the war?
Yes,
Tell me about that.
The beginning, well, number one, my husband and I, of course, we were married by then, and I just dreaded the thought that he'd be called into the service, be drafted. Worked for the post office. He'd been there for how many years? I think it was close to 10 or 15 years. And I left work in Republic to have our first youngster. And of course he was given a deferment from the draft because of that. But that didn't last long. We only had one child. So he was inducted into the service.
He was.
Going in the same day, in the same place as one of my younger brothers, the one that became a priest. And on March 17th, 1944, they were both shipped out to Camp Upton. And different than what would usually happen, he worked for the post office all that while, and they sent him to postal school. But with my brother, he worked for Republic and had a very responsible position there, but he was that much younger, and they drafted him into the infantry.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was missing in action in the Battle of the Bulge, and then wound up as a prisoner of war, we discovered. And that was another thing my dad did. He had a shortwave radio. He used to sit up all night listening, of course, listening for his own son. But for any that he heard, he would call those people and let them know that he heard that they were not dead, that they were encamped in a prisoner of war camp. And that was where my brother Carl decided he would go into the ministry. When he came back, thank God he came back, he was able to go back to work in Republic, but he studied nights to become a priest, and he did.
Uh-huh.
So, and he's 3 years younger than I.
Mm-hmm.
He is also retired. He lives out east in Cutchogue,
Oh.
Peconic Cutchogue.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, he lost his wife to Alzheimer's disease.
Oh,
Yeah,
dear. I know
so,
what that's all about.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But we were a close family. While my father and mother were alive, we were very close. Now, out of the 8 of us, there's 3 of us left. My sister and my brother out there and myself.
Mm-hmm. Do you see one another very often?
I see my sister every morning because we
great.
walk
Yes,
4
of course
miles
you
a
walk.
day.
That's terrific. Oh, good.
But my brother Carl, I don't see
Yes.
that much. It's
Mm.
kind of, it's too much of a trip for him to make here.
Yes.
And we don't get out that way
Yes.
that often. But
Yes.
we keep in touch on
Mhm.
phone. And
I'm just thinking, as we're speaking, the changes, the number of historical events that have occurred in your life that you have witnessed and been a part of with the family. Do you remember the day the war ended?
oh, yes, yes. VE Day and also with the Japanese War.
Yes. VJ Day.
We were very fortunate also. My husband I told you, he went to postal school. And then he was going to be shipped out. Of course, we didn't know where to. No one knew that. And I went down to see him, and he was in Petersburg in Virginia, and visited him for a little while and came home back. I was living with my mother and father. And then he was shipped out, but fortunately he was shipped out here to New York, and he worked in the APO in New York for the while he was in the service. He wasn't shipped overseas. So we were lucky. Of course, it cost us money for him to commute, but at least I had him here where a lot of other people didn't.
How did you hear of President Roosevelt's death?
On the radio.
You did?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, again, being in Brentwood for all those years and watching the changes of time and tide, did you have chores as a youngster that you were responsible
that's what's wrong
for?
with the children today. I mean, I didn't say we went at them so willingly. I mean, you had to be prompted to do that.
Like what? What did you have to do?
Well, my job was to do the dishes, which I hated. We had kerosene stove, and somebody had to fill that little gallon kerosene thing every day after school. During Depression time, and this was even after we were married, to be able to get coal for your domestic hot water, we had a little potbelly stove. We used to pick the good coals out of the ashes.
Sure.
In fact, my father, I guess he bought it. He didn't make it, but it was this ingenious thing where you took all those ashes and dumped them in, and you ground this handle like the old stuff went out and the good stuff fell down the bottom.
Waste not, want not.
Right.
Yes.
How many times we heard that? I had a German grandmother.
But we were talking about this before. Didn't the Depression and the events of those years impact on us in terms of not throwing things away or having difficulty in letting go of?
It's terrible even till this day.
Being savers. Yeah.
We should clean so much stuff up out of our house. And we say we're going to do it, and the days pass. The days go too quickly, even at this age. I guess it's because we're able to be up and about. I guess if we were tied down to a chair and watching the clock, it would be terrible. Yes. But I don't know.
Has your love of a particular season changed through the years? Do you have one season that you prefer over the others?
Springtime.
Has that changed at all for you, or is it still? It's always been your favorite.
I still look forward
season.
to spring.
Yes. Yeah.
I love the fall, but it's a sad time of the year to me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a beautiful time of year.
Yes, it is beautiful. We spent a lot of our days up in New England at that time of the year, changing color. We love that. We had friends up there.
Have you changed this part of your makeup? Are you a morning person or an evening person?
Morning.
Always been?
Yeah, always been.
Okay.
And so has my husband, fortunately. Like even today, I mean, he doesn't have to get up. I get up because I go for the walk. He can't do that. Mm-hmm. But he'll be up. That little alarm in his head is
still there. That biological clock that rings off every morning. Yes.
Right.
Well, There are specific memories that you've told us about Brentwood. Where did you do your shopping?
In Kohler's General Store on First Avenue there. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yes,
where
I am.
that is. That was where the firehouse, the general store, the post office. Everything was done there.
So you knew the Kohler family, did you?
I knew the Kohler family well, yeah. And Mrs. Kohler's father, I guess he owned the store first, and Connie. In fact, Flo Kohler was a teacher to my younger brothers.
Really? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Florence.
But she was a newcomer, you see, to us because.
Yes, I remember Florence told me that she arrived in Brentwood in 1932.
Yeah.
That's when her first day of teaching was in September of 1932.
That was when Lee Stewart started.
Yes.
You know, was he wasn't called the administrative assistant then. He was the principal.
And she was then 21 years old when she started on that day. Yeah. Brentwood, in those days, did not have a supermarket.
No. Kohler's store was it.
That was it.
And a little later on, there was a Butler's store over on Brentwood Road. Butler's.
You didn't have to worry about locking your doors either, did you?
I had no keys. No.
There are probably a lot of things that we don't miss about those days, Ruth, but I wonder if there are things that you do miss about them.
Well, family, of course, being as close as they were.
Course.
And
yes. Yeah.
I don't think any of that, as you were going through it, you might have resented, you didn't have a lot of things that I had. One of my close girlfriends that I went to school with, she was an only child, so naturally she was able to do more afforded things that I wasn't able to have, you know. We had to share. She didn't. And then later on, there was a difference of 13 years between herself and her younger brother. And her younger brother is married to my niece, the little girl that my husband brought me up to see when she was born. So it stays together.
Yes. You did most of your work in the same buildings then when you in Northeast? And
I stayed at North. Well, in the beginning, I used to have to go down and help Mr. Stewart's secretary do the payroll.
For the entire district.
Right.
Yeah.
It was all done on typewriter.
Sure.
Well, computer didn't come in till after a while.
Right.
It always amazed me because they had the computers with the big cards. But once a year, we had to keep our own index cards. And once a year, they'd send that box that pertained to your school, to your building, and you had to check those computer cards against yours, which were done manually, to see that they were right.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
But that was new to me, too. I wasn't familiar with that. But I learned about schooling and that part of it by going through it. You know.
These were Key Punch, I think. Was that Key Punch in the early days of the...
Yeah, I wasn't involved with that.
No,
I just had the cards.
Right.
Edna Shattini and those gals that worked down there.
Yeah, who else was there with Edna? What do you remember?
Well, Edna Shattini worked in that part of it. I don't really remember in that part.
All right. Yeah. You and I were talking before about your involvement with the professional organization, and you had mentioned CSEA at one point, and then you mentioned. Tell me about that again for our audience.
Well, actually, I guess it was in agreement with all the clerical help at the time. There weren't that many. There was one girl for each building. Mm-hmm. And
there was no organization at first.
Right. We used to meet at each other's home.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. We used to meet at each other's home.
Kind of unofficially, but you had a network.
We had a network. Not that it did too much good, but we had a network of sticking together. And finally, we did have the union. And then it changed from CSEA to just a Brentwood organization. I don't really remember the details on that. And all they were doing was working toward helping us to improve our salaries, which were really rather meager, you know. But
Was Yvette Zimmerman a name that you would remember? She was up at the high school, secretary, and actively involved for a while. I wondered if there were
The
any.
last name Zimmerman is familiar, but
Yeah.
there was, of course, Virginia Daytree, but she was.
Yes.
She was, in fact, she was hoping that she would be appointed. She asked for me to recommend her. When Ralph Sakin moved from the North School to the Northeast School to the Northeast School, when they built that school, he decided he would like to move up there because it was a bigger building and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And they were looking for a person for there, and she wanted to go up there with him.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason or other, she didn't make it. But then she wound up in the, I think she worked in the payroll office.
I think so too. I seem to remember that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But you also mentioned you are, of course, a member of R.O.B.S and therefore affiliated with NYSET, although you said you are not entitled to.
Not entitled to any of the benefits, whatever
Benefits.
they are, that
Mm-hmm.
they.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, just recently I received a notice saying that they would like to continue sending their newsletter to all their colleagues, but I would have to send in a certain form, which I did because
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate those newsletters. We don't get to too many of the meetings, but
the communication is so important for people to stay in touch, to know the changes that are happening, be they changes in Medicare or whatever, through the organization. I think it's you're quite right. It's important for people to be connected. Was there or are there specific moments, either high points or maybe even events that were sad, but that you remember, things that have happened to you professionally when you think back over the years, certain memories that come out, certain days that you will never forget, or an experience that stays with you? You were here, of course, during those turbulent years of the 60s, during the assassination of President Kennedy, during Robert Kennedy's death, during Martin Luther King's assassination. These were the days of the civil rights movement. These were the days where we had to take a loyalty oath that we didn't belong to the Communist Party.
That's right.
There were many, many changes that have occurred. This is even before drugs became a problem.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had any memories associated with any of those events or other things that you could share with us.
None of those events, really. As I said, when I began at Northeast School, there were 14 teachers, including the cleric, 14 people, including the clerical and the custodian.
Yes.
And we were like one little family. But then, of course, bigger it grew, although I can never say that there was anyone that didn't treat me fine, really, even as we grew. We grew from that picture of Ralph Sakin and his 13 little to school pictures about that big.
Yes, exactly.
And I remember a lot of those people.
How many years did you put into the district or working for the district? I
worked for 24 years.
Mm-hmm.
I had worked for a year and a half at Pilgrim State Hospital in the typing pool there before I went to the school, Brentwood School. So I had 25 years with the state because it was state.
Okay. Now, at a certain point, you decided, I think it's time for me to do something else.
That's right.
What brought you to that decision?
Well, I kind of looked forward to it the last few years before I retired when I was 60, so I was penalized with my Social Security because I didn't wait at least till I was 62. But my husband was retired 6 years before I was, so he was at home. And we decided that I thought I might have to do part-time work. In fact, when I retired, that was one of the gift from the teachers in Northeast School. Oh, I guess everybody that attended contributed to an electric correcting typewriter.
Oh, isn't that lovely?
It was nice, yeah. Because I thought I would have to do outside work to sustain us. And fortunately, I didn't have to. We managed. Mm-hmm. Tighten your belt a little bit. And,
that's right.
Yeah. I don't know how I had time to go to work.
Because you've been busy, haven't you?
Well, busy with our own little busyness.
That's all right.
We like to travel.
Some people are afraid of retirement, you know. They don't know what they're going to do with their time. They're very afraid of this step. But you certainly have not had a problem with...
No, because my husband and I like to do a lot of the same things.
Isn't that great?
And then because my son and daughter-in-law moved that far away, and we look forward to at least that one trip a year to do that. And then we've gotten to see parts of California, which we probably would not have ever done had they not been there. I don't know what's worth that separation for the rest of the year, but it has given us. We missed our grandchildren growing up. We miss our great-grandchildren growing up. They're 6 and 9 years old, so, you know.
And then when they're that young and you don't get to see them on a regular basis, it's like getting to know grandma or great-grandma all over again each time, too. Yeah.
But the older great-granddaughter, she's in the 4th grade, so she is able to write to us.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, good. Good.
And they have their computer, so we can do emails.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're part of the computer generation?
Well, I am. We are. It was
fabulous.
My granddaughter that's coming to visit us next month is more or less responsible for that. She came a year ago on New Year's Eve and spent a week and a half with us. And while she was here, she said, you know, Grandma and Grandpa, you always talked about the computer. If there's any way I could help you, you know. So we thought about it and decided if not now. So while she was here, she shopped with us and picked out what better person could you ask than a gal that works for Intel. Anyway, she set us up before she left and got us on the email, internet. And shortly after she went home, we started adult ed. Now, this is the 3rd semester we're taking. We're still on doing very slow learners as far as that's concerned.
But isn't it wonderful, though?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you've taken 3 courses in adult ed on the computer.
Right, right.
That's wonderful.
But we still don't know as much as those 9-year-old kids.
Oh, it's a very different experience. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, yeah.
They seem to be wired as from the birth with the potential to learn.
Just Tuesday night, we get up in the hallway before the other class is dismissed. And when you hear the other people talking, they sound just like me. That she said, my grandson will say, you know. And she'll say, but I don't understand what you mean. Exactly. So we all have the same problem.
Well, you retired then in what year was it? I didn't
1978.
Ask you. And so we're now in 1999. So you've had plenty of time to get used to the concept of retirement.
Right, yeah.
But you haven't let any moss grow under your feet because you have been, as I said, busy with not just with family, but you have been taking these computer courses. What else have you been doing with all those years? You've traveled?
Yes, we travel. We don't travel extensively. One of my brothers, just older than I, he was as old as my husband and his wife. When they are both passed on, unfortunately. But when they were alive, we traveled more, you know, we went to Bermuda and to Nassau and different car trips right here in the country. And in 1967, my husband and I drove a car to California for a friend of one of the teachers in Northeast School. Because I was so devastated when my son and daughter-in-law left that everybody knew that they were gone, and if I could only get out there. So I passed that word along. If you ever know if someone wants to drive a car one way, that's what we would do. And she had neighbors, the woman of whom worked for TWA, and they were transferring her out there. And they had a new Peugeot. It was only about 4 months old, and they wanted that car out there. So she got us in touch with them, and just like that, with no plans or whatever, my husband and I, he was retired already, but I wasn't.
So you drove to California
We drove
in
to
a Peugeot.
California in a Peugeot. Got stuck in Gillette, Wyoming. Never even heard of the town before. We had burned out a valve in this new car. And we wound up in some cowboy country, and where they fixed this car for us. But we had to wait they had to send for a part to Wyoming, to Cheyenne, and they sent it by bus. So we had to wait for the part to come to fix. So it cut short our vacation with our children, because that's what we were going to do.
Sure.
But we brought the car there and visited them for a little while, which was short, and then we drove the car and left it. You couldn't do that today.
No.
Left the car at TWA, and left the keys with somebody she told us to give them to, and took the plane and came home.
You're adventurous.
I wish we would have done that many more times. We could have,
yes.
you know.
I must ask you this because of the opportunities you've had over the years. I mean, you've been retired 22 years. To leave Brentwood, you've chosen to stay. And you've seen so many changes here.
Yeah, well, the biggest part of my family was still here.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be a toss-up. Do you want to be with the youngsters, who might move from here to there to everywhere?
Yes.
And we couldn't follow them around always.
Exactly.
Or be here with that part of the family that we grew up with. It was a hard decision to make.
Yes.
I always figure that stuff is in God's hands. Why we didn't.
Exactly right. And we were just talking before we went on camera about the changes, about some of the negative press that Brentwood gets.
Right.
And of course, we have all seen examples of the negative press. But those of us who spent a professional life in the district know of all the positives, the wonderful things.
That's right.
And I think your life and decision to remain for the time that you have is testimony to somebody who sees a lot of the good. What are some of the best things about this community that you can
at the present moment, you mean?
At the present moment.
I'm really not that much involved with outside.
Yes. Okay.
Part of the community anymore, you know.
How about if the question was the Brentwood that you know and love whenever? What is it that makes that had
everybody working
that you have
together?
affection for?
Everybody knew each other. It was like family. You know, the neighbors and
yes.
the people that you went to school with, and the people that taught you and helped you. And
you clearly were familiar with a small town America.
Right.
What you're describing is something that probably belongs to a bygone time.
Oh, I guess, yeah.
The changes and the number of people that come, the community now exists probably in places like the school district or the fire department or agencies within the community rather than the town.
That's
which
right.
was at one time.
It's sort of more or less, you're a stranger in your own hometown.
Yes.
Even on your own street where you lived, so many have either moved away or passed away, and, you know, not that you're not friendly with the people that move in, but it's more a hi, goodbye type thing than everybody working together. But that's the way life is today.
Is there anything that you miss about not working and the work that you did?
No, not really, because I have the typewriter at home. If I have the time to use it, I do, and I don't really miss it. I wouldn't. It took a couple of months to adjust to being retired, but I think everybody finds that.
Oh, I think so too. I think so too. Ruth, I want to thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it.
For
you're asking me,
and I look forward to seeing you at our next R.O.B.S General Meeting. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.